The United States is a federal republic with elected officials at the federal, state and local levels. On a national level, the head of state, the president, is elected indirectly by the people, through an electoral college. Today, the electors virtually always vote with the popular vote of their state. All members of the federal legislature, the Congress, are directly elected. There are many elected offices at state level, each state having at least an elective governor and legislature. There are also elected offices at the local level, in counties and cities. According to a study by political scientist Jennifer Lawless, there were 519,682 elected officials in the United States as of 2012. State law regulates most aspects of the election, including primaries, the eligibility of voters, the running of each state's electoral college, and the running of state and local elections. The United States Constitution defines how federal elections are held, in Article 1 and Article 2 and various amendments. The restriction and extension of voting rights to different groups has been a contested process throughout the United States' history. The federal government has also been involved in attempts to increase voter turnout, by measures such as the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. The financing of elections has always been controversial, because private sources make up substantial amounts of campaign contributions, especially in federal elections. Voluntary public funding for candidates willing to accept spending limits was introduced in 1974 for presidential primaries and elections. The Federal Elections Commission, created in 1975 by an amendment to the Federal Election Campaign Act, has the responsibility to disclose campaign finance information, to enforce the provisions of the law such as the limits and prohibitions on contributions, and to oversee the public funding of U.S. presidential elections. Voting method. The most common method used in U.S. elections is the first-past-the-post system, where the highest polling candidate wins the election. Some may use a two-round system, where if no candidate receives a required number of votes, then there is a runoff between the two candidates with the most votes. Since 2002, several cities have adopted instant runoff voting in their elections. Voters rank the candidates in order of preference rather than voting for a single candidate. If a candidate secures more than half of votes cast, that candidate wins. Otherwise, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated. Ballots assigned to the eliminated candidate are recounted and assigned to those of the remaining candidates, who rank next in order of preference on each ballot. This process continues until one candidate wins by obtaining more than half the votes. Eligibility. The eligibility of an individual for voting is set out in the Constitution and also regulated at state level. The Constitution states that suffrage cannot be denied on grounds of race or color, sex or age for citizens 18 years or older. Beyond these basic qualifications, it is the responsibility of state legislatures to regulate voter eligibility. Some states ban convicted criminals, especially felons, from voting for a fixed period of time or indefinitely. The number of American adults who are currently or permanently ineligible to vote due to felony convictions is estimated to be 5.3 million. Some states also have legacy constitutional statements barring the insane or idiots from voting. Such references are generally considered obsolete and are being considered for review or removal where they appear. Voter registration. While the federal government has jurisdiction over federal elections, most election laws are decided at the state level. All U.S. states except North Dakota require that citizens who wish to vote be registered. Traditionally, voters had to register at state offices to vote, but in the mid-1990s efforts were made by the federal government to make registering easier, in an attempt to increase turnout. The National Voter Registration Act of 1993 required state governments that receive certain types of federal funding to make the voter registration registration process easier by providing uniform registration services through driver's license registration centers, disability centers, schools, libraries, and mail-in registration. Other states allow citizens same-day registration on election day. In many states, citizens registering to vote may declare an affiliation with a political party. This declaration of affiliation does not cost money, and does not make the citizen a dues-paying member of a party. A party cannot prevent a voter from declaring his or her affiliation with them, but it can refuse requests for full membership. In some states, only voters affiliated with a party may vote in that party's primary elections. Declaring a party affiliation is never required. Some states, including Georgia, Michigan, Minnesota, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Washington, practice nonpartisan registration. Absentee voting voters unable or unwilling to vote at polling stations on election day can vote via absentee ballots. Absentee ballots are most commonly sent and received via the United States Postal Service. Despite their name, absentee ballots are often requested and submitted in person. About half of all states and U.S. territories allow no-excuse absentee, where no reason is required to request an absentee ballot. Others require a valid reason, such as infirmity or travel, be given before a voter can participate using an absentee ballot. Some states, including California and Washington, allow citizens to apply for permanent absentee voter status, which will automatically receive an absentee ballot for each election. Typically, a voter must request an absentee ballot before the election occurs. A significant source of absentee ballots is the population of Americans living outside the United States. In 1986, Congress enacted the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act. UOCAVA requires that the states and territories allow members of the United States Uniformed Services and Merchant Marine, their family members, and United States citizens residing outside the United States to register and vote absentee in elections for federal offices. Though many states had pre-existing statutes in place, UOCAVA made it mandatory and nationally uniform. Generally, all U.S. citizens 19 years or older who are or will be residing outside the United States during an election period are eligible to vote absentee in any election for federal office. In addition, all members of the uniformed services, their family members and members of the Merchant Marine and their family members, who are U.S. citizens, may vote absentee in federal, state and local elections. Absentee ballots from these voters can often be transmitted private delivery services, fax, or email. Mail ballots. Mail ballots are similar in many respects to an absentee ballot. However, they are used for mailing precincts where on election day no polling place is opened for a specific precinct. In Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, all ballots are delivered through the mail. Early voting. Early voting is a formal process where voters can cast their ballots prior to the official election day. Early voting in person is allowed in 33 states and in Washington, D.C., with no excuse required. Voting equipment. Voters casting their ballots in polling places record their votes most commonly with optical scan voting machines or dray voting machines. Voting machine selection is typically done through a state's local election jurisdiction, including counties, cities, and townships. Many of these local jurisdictions have changed their voting equipment since 2000 due to the passage of the Help America Vote Act, which allocated funds for the replacement of lever machine and punch card voting equipment. Levels of election. Federal elections. The United States has a presidential system of government, which means that the executive and legislature are elected separately. Article 1 of the United States Constitution requires that any election for the U.S. president must occur on a single day throughout the country. Elections for congressional offices, however, can be held at different times. Congressional and presidential elections take place simultaneously every 4 years, and the intervening congressional elections, which take place every 2 years, are called midterm elections. The Constitution states that members of the United States House of Representatives must be at least 25 years old, a citizen of the United States for at least 7 years, and be an inhabitant of the state they represent. Senators must be at least 30 years old, a citizen of the United States for at least 9 years, and be an inhabitant of the state they represent. The president must be at least 35 years old, a natural-born citizen of the United States and a resident in the United States for at least 14 years. It is the responsibility of state legislatures to regulate the qualifications for a candidate appearing on a ballot paper. Although in order to get onto the ballot, a candidate must often collect a legally defined number of signatures. Presidential elections, the president and the vice president are elected together in a presidential election. It is an indirect election, with the winner being determined by votes cast by electors of the Electoral College. In modern times, voters in each state select a slate of electors from a list of several slates designated by different parties or candidates, and the electors typically promise in advance to vote for the candidates of their party. The winner of the election is the candidate with at least 270 Electoral College votes. It is possible for a candidate to win the electoral vote, and lose the popular vote. Until the 12th Amendment to the United States Constitution of 1804, the runner-up in a presidential election became the vice president. Electoral College votes are cast by individual states by a group of electors. Each elector casts one Electoral College vote. Until the 23rd Amendment to the United States Constitution of 1961, the District of Columbia citizens did not have representation and/or electors in the Electoral College. In modern times, with electors usually committed to vote for a party candidate in advance, electors that vote against the popular vote in their state are called faithless electors, and occurrences are rare. State law regulates how states cast their Electoral College votes. In all states except Maine and Nebraska, the candidate that wins the most votes in the state receives all its Electoral College votes. From 1969 in Maine, and from 1991 in Nebraska, 2 electoral votes are awarded based on the winner of the statewide election, and the rest go to the highest vote winner in each of the state's congressional districts. Congressional elections. Congress has 2 chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Senate elections. The Senate has 100 members, elected for a 6-year term in dual-seat constituencies, with 1/3 being renewed every 2 years. The group of the Senate seats that is up for election during a given year is known as a class. The 3 classes are staggered so that only one of the 3 groups is renewed every 2 years. Until the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution in 1913, states chose how to elect senators, and they were often elected by state legislatures, not the electorate of states. House of Representatives elections. The House of Representatives has 435 members, elected for a 2-year term in single-seat constituencies. House of Representatives elections are held every 2 years on the first Tuesday after November 1st in even years. Special House elections can occur between if a member dies or resigns during a term. House elections are first past the post elections that elect a representative from each of 435 House districts which cover the United States. the non-voting delegates of Washington, D.C., and the territories of American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands are also elected. House elections occur every 2 years, correlated with presidential elections are halfway through a president's term. The House delegate of Puerto Rico, officially known as the Resident Commissioner of Puerto Rico, is elected to a 4-year term, coinciding with those of the president. As the redistricting commissions of states are often partisan, districts are often drawn which benefit incumbents. An increasing trend has been for incumbents to have an overwhelming advantage in House elections, and since the 1994 election, an unusually low number of seats has changed hands in each election. Due to gerrymandering, fewer than 10% of all House seats are contested in each election cycle. Over 90% of House members are re-elected every 2 years, due to lack of electoral competition. Gerrymandering of the House, combined with the divisions inherent in the design of the Senate and of the Electoral College, result in a discrepancy between the percentage of popular support for various political parties and the actual level of the party's representation. State elections, state law and state constitutions, controlled by state legislatures, regulate elections at state level and local level. Various officials at state level are elected. Since the separation of powers applies to states as well as the federal government, state legislatures and the executive are elected separately. Governors and lieutenant governor are elected in all states, in some states on a joint ticket and in some states separately, some separately in different electoral cycles. The governors of the territories of American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands are also elected. In some states, executive positions such as Attorney General and Secretary of State are also elected officers. All members of state legislatures and territorial jurisdiction legislatures are elected. In some states, members of the state Supreme Court and other members of the state judiciary are elected. Proposals to amend the state constitution are also placed on the ballot in some states, as a matter of convenience and cost-saving. Elections for many of these state and local offices are held at the same time as either the federal presidential or midterm elections. There are a handful of states, however, that instead hold their elections during odd-numbered, off years. Local elections. At the local level, county and city government positions are usually filled by election, especially within the legislative branch. The extent to which officers in the executive or judicial branches are elected vary from county to county or city to city. Some examples of local elected positions include sheriffs at the county level and mayors and school board members at the city level. Like state elections, an election for a specific local office may be held at the same time as either the presidential, midterm, or off-year elections. Comparison of recent and upcoming election years.